other corporates had then started looking for PR people, and actually it became like a generic term. People would say they were looking for a Gina Din, and so I found it really interesting that people were looking for a me.
Yes.
I was like, oh, this is interesting, this is cool. But, and then I had a wonderful boss at Barclays, and I said to him one day, I said, I don't know, like I've done 14 years now, I will never be the MD of the bank because I'm not a banker. And, you can carry on giving me more money. And my titles changed, whatever it was, corporate affairs, PR, whatever, but they were just titles. And I could expand the job as much as I wanted to. But, I knew then that I needed to do something else. And, what were the options? I could leave and go to a KQ or a breweries or whatever, but it would be the same thing. I would still be doing exactly the same work. And and my boss said to me at that time, he says, why don't you go and start out on your own? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you've become such a generic term that if people are looking for one of you, then you're definitely a product, which you could probably then offer to others. And I was like, really? That sounded like a lot, and very frightening, because I had a lot of security and safety under this Barclays name. It was very, very safe. Most people were going from cradle to grave at Barclays.
Yep.
People didn't leave. People, why would you? You got your cheap loans.
Yep.
Excellent pay. And so most of my colleagues were in there for the long term.
That's where you want to end up.
And that's exactly. And I was like, okay, but then I couldn't also see myself doing the same work. So anyway, I made this decision that, okay, I would go and think about what my boss had said to me. And I was like, okay, this is really an interesting idea. But then a lot of people around me were saying, you cannot do a PR company on its own. There is no way. Was
there anybody who had a PR company?
There were some one-man Muzungu shows, they're like a one-man show. Like there was, a guy working from his house and would do, I don't know, British Airways or something like that. But there wasn't a company.
I get it. So when people are saying they're looking for Gina Din, they really didn't have an option of someone to find.
No, they didn't. They really didn't. And and I was being quoted by all the other corporates.
Yeah, they must have been like,
yeah, why, But I was very loyal to Barclays. I mean, why wouldn't I be? They were very good to me. And what was the point of just leaving them to go to another corporate? So then I started thinking quite hard about, okay, I need to start out on my own.
How many years later is this again?
40. I'd done 14 years at Barclays.
Okay.
Nathan was a year. And I wanted to definitely spend more time with my kids. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And then my boss said something which was actually what really was, for me, made the deal. He said, look, why don't you go and start out on your own, and we will close down the PR department of Barclays.
What?
Mm-hmm. And we will outsource all that work to you, so you have an anchor client.
Ah, man.
And I was like, I came home and I said to Chris, I couldn't believe how good God is, because that was just God. I mean, there's no other way. How do you explain it? And Chris said, are you sure? Like, you heard? And I said, I think so. And the next day I went and I said, so I just want to go back to our conversation, And he's like, yeah, so like, when do you want to leave? Just tell me. And
who's this boss?
And
just mention his
he's
name.
The most wonderful man. His name is Bob Bird. He lives in Australia. He's retired. But a great mentor to me. And somebody who really taught me, because, when my father died, I'd lost my male mentor, but I was very fortunate to work for a wonderful, wonderful man. And so that's exactly what happened. They closed down the department. They sold me all my furniture from my first office very cheaply. And I got my first client.
But let's also say this. They knew they couldn't get another Gina Din. I'm not trying to, I am bigging you up.
I think they really appreciated, I think they knew what I brought to the table.
Yep.
But it was very fortunate that I had a client that I didn't really have to worry, because I didn't need to put in any money into the business.
Yep.
We rented a place, an old house.
Okay, so you leave. Can you remember the date that you left?
1st of October.
What year?
1997.
Whoa, that must have been so huge. You do
It
remember
was huge.
the dates.
Well, so the crazy thing for me was that I sort of hear this thing from my boss about, okay, we will give you our work. So you'll do exactly what you're doing, but as a consultant. And I come down and I had a young PA, young girl, Christine, and she was very sweet, and I felt very sad that I was going to leave her. But I decided I had to be honest with her. So I called her and I'm like, Christine, look, this is what's happening. I'm going to be leaving, but you're fine. You're a banker. The bank will find a place for you. And she just looked at me and she said, I'm leaving with you. And I'm like, no. I got really scared because I was fine leaving myself, but I couldn't. The thought of an employee was just, I couldn't. And she's like, no, I am. And I said, but I can't pay you what the bank's paying. And she said, it's okay. And she left. So she left 3 months before me.
Whoa.
Set up the office. She was like, she was employee number one, even before me. And I have so much respect for her because she gave up a huge future and she bet on me. And I gave her so much time to go and think about it. She was young. I said, go and talk to your mom, make sure this is what you want to do. And she was like, yep, that's what I want to do.
I'm sure.
And so 1st of October, I, suddenly go to our gate, which had bank security, and there was nobody there to open the gate. And I'm like, oh, fine.
It starts.
Now it starts.
Welcome to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so that was, but I had the Barclays accounts. We did that for 3 years.
Oh, such a good safety net.
It was such a good, and then I said to, Bob Bird, my boss said, and I said, well, what happens if it doesn't work? What if I fail? Because failure was such a big thing. Like I was so scared of failing. And he said, well, if you fail, you'll just come back, and we'll give you your job back. So it was like a no-brainer.
Man.
Yeah. I mean, he was just one of those people that I will always look back at and just say, wow, what a wonderful, wonderful person to have opened so many doors for me.
I love the fact that you've talked about the emotions that you were going through, even though you knew this is what you needed to do to get the stuff that you want, the time, the maybe even expansion, but you were scared and terrified.
I was terrified. I mean, being an entrepreneur, as you will know, it's not for the faint-hearted. It really isn't, and it's also not for everybody.
Yep.
I think that's the thing. I think we just need, we need to all appreciate that. There's so much talk about, being an entrepreneur, and or are we entrepreneurs or are we self-employed? I think they're two different things. A lot of people that are self-employed, which is fine, but an entrepreneur is the one that's going to take the risks, and expand. And I wanted to be that person, but I never, ever, Richard, in my wildest imagination would see us growing to being what we were.
In fact, I was going to ask you, when you stepped out, you didn't see this. You didn't see Gina Din.
No.
You didn't see selling your company for.
No. I didn't.
You didn't see the different clients that you'd have?
I did. I just stepped out in faith.
Okay.
Oh
man, I love
faith.
that.
I just stepped out in faith, and I knew I'd be fine. But suddenly I would go into the bank and I wouldn't have my bank ID anymore, I wasn't an employee. I was a consultant. So and it was different. The day before I left, they had a farewell party for me, and I was like saying to them, but guys, I'm going to still be here. And they were, yes, you are, but it's not going to be the same. And I didn't realize what that meant until I really wasn't there all the time. It was different. I'd created such incredible friendships at the bank. They were, and because I was so young when I joined, there were other older women who were, PAs and secretaries who had seen me through the births of my 2 children, who had been there for me. They were family. Beautiful spirits, incredible, and it was hard. It was very hard, and suddenly it was different. The day I was a consultant, it was different.
Okay, but now I'm excited about this next stage. This is a new phase in which we're going into. So my first question is, who was your next client? Or first of all, actually, how does this relationship with Barclays go? So
the interesting thing for me was because of the multinationals that Barclays dealt with, and because I was dealing with them every day, they were like, as soon as I'd left, they were on the phone. Like, like Kenya Shell, the MD would be like, so now you can handle us. I'm like, yeah, so it was quick.
Whoa.
It was very quick. It was like Barclays was here. The next day there was just calls.
That's crazy.
And mostly were clients of Barclays, who had seen the quality of the work, the events, the press, and they're like, oh, we want that too.
Who had experienced you?
Yeah, who had experienced me. So, in a way, the 14 years I had at the bank, I'd also built a brand.
That's powerful.
I'd built my brand. And I didn't even realize how strong that brand was. So when I was kind of getting ready to leave, by now I had a new boss who was, who had stepped in as Bob Bird left. So the last month or two was with the new MD. And he said, so what's this thing of yours going to be called? And I'm like, oh, I don't have a name yet. And he said, well, so who are we entering into an agreement with? And I didn't have a name. Because I had no idea what to call it, and I would spend hours just like, I don't know what to call it. And this guy, Peter Gear, my new boss, said to me one day, well, I don't understand the problem. And I said, well, I still don't have a name. He said, well, what's your name? And he sat there and and I said, Gina Din. And he's like, and what do you do? So I said, corporate communications. And he goes, well, okay, what's a no-brainer then? And I looked at him, he said, yeah, well, it's actually a no-brainer. You are known very well for the work that you do. So your name plus what you do, and you've got your name.
That is so perfect.
And that's exactly what happened. So then, sort of that evening I went home and I was sort of Googling, Gina Din Corporate Communications. What does it sound like? And how does, it was very interesting.
That is crazy.
And then I had a friend in London who I called and I said, oh, I'm leaving and this is what I'm going to be doing. And he said, oh, why don't you come to London? I'll introduce you to Saatchi & Saatchi, who were then the biggest advertising company in the world.
Okay, Gina, let's slow down a bit. So first and foremost, I want to understand, you've talked about 14 years. Explain to me how PR has changed in these 14 years.
So I think there was a lot more focus on some of the things that I'd done. Like there was, the touch and feel of your client had become a lot more important. You could no longer talk down to your clients, because don't forget, banking was almost like they were doing you a favor by letting you have an account with them. And there was competition starting, so you couldn't afford to do that anymore. So it had changed from becoming a lot more where we had to really get to know our clients, and I think I brought that to the bank. In terms of the press had started to get much more knowledgeable about banking. I remember a point when Barclays said there would be a minimum deposit.
Let me shock you. I actually worked at Barclays Bank.
Oh, you did?
And the time when I worked at Barclays Bank as an internship, I was so confused because there was a minimum deposit of 20,000 Kenyan shillings at that time.
So this was now obviously before then, but they set a minimum. And of course, that became a huge political problem because the teachers had nowhere else to bank. So so suddenly the teachers couldn't keep a deposit of 20,000 or whatever it was. So those were the issues that we had to then become very politically aware that in a lot of places, Barclays was the only branch there. And if we started setting minimum balances, these people would be unbanked.
Yep.
So, there was a lot more, in terms of being very aware and being very sensitive to what your customer wants during that 14 years.
Okay.
And the press had become a lot, they had really gone for like, okay, these, first of all, British banks, coming in, telling, having these crazy, it needs to be much more of a Kenyan bank.
Yep.
And so there was a lot of change. We started using Swahili a lot more in our ads. And that was something that I brought in, just trying to make the bank much more Kenyan and making Kenyans feel they owned part of the bank, which now that there'd been a share issue, they actually did. And I think that was something that was very important for me, that if Kenyans have bought shares, actually they own it. So we can't carry on with some of these colonial things that the hangover that they had. We had to be a Kenyan bank. So that was very critical time for the bank, and I played a very big part in that during those 14 years.
I've heard you say that you Googled Gina Din Corporate Kenya. So are we talking about a slight introduction of the digital space happening?
No, I was doodling. Not doodling. I was writing on a piece of paper.
I get
just
it.
to kind of figure out what it sounded like.
Okay, I get it.
And I remember Natalia, she would say, "Mom, what are you doing?" And I said, I'm writing, and she says, why are you writing your name? And I said, because that's going to be the name of my office. And she looked at me and she said, the name of your office? And she found it so strange. And she went off and had a bath. I was like, okay. And I said, you like it? And she said, yeah, it sounds nice,
Little did she know.
But so anyway, I called this friend of mine in London, and he says, look, why don't you just come? So I go, and he takes me to this incredible Saatchi & Saatchi advertising company, the largest in the world, and I get to spend an afternoon, which I would never have been able to afford, with their branding guys. And we go through like what my name would look like, on a brand. And of course they said to me, what color do you want? What color do you want your brand to be? And I said, blue, because that's all I knew. Barclays blue. I was very loyal to the blue. And I said, I want it. And they looked at me and they're like, no, because you're trying to get away from that identity. You're creating your own identity. So we can't have your name in the same blue as Barclays. I mean, no, this is now your own identity. It was very scary to hear them say that. And I said, okay, so, then they ran through different colors, and I was so blessed.
So you were understanding the power of a brand.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so they had a slideshow. They showed me different variations. It was awesome. And that night they took me out for dinner and to this wonderful restaurant in London. But they'd done the menu with the branding. And I was like, it was so powerful.
Yep.
That night I'd looked down and suddenly on the menus, there was Gina Din Corporate Communications and the menu. And I just kept looking at it and I'm like, wow.
It's real.
It's real. That's gonna be a name. That's gonna be a company. And I flew home a couple of days later and I wouldn't let go of these menus. I was so excited to see my name in a brand.
Gina, this story, I'm loving this story. I feel like there's so many lessons as you
and
just
I kept looking at it in the plane, I was like, I just kept looking at it and I was like, wow. It was amazing.
Okay, let me ask this. It's okay if you're just handling Barclays and that's one client, but when you leave, you get all these other clients. Does that mean you instantly grow in terms of even personnel? Or
no,
what happens?
I was scared. I mean, to be honest with you, having, being responsible for other people was a huge fear.
Yep.
I didn't want that. So I had Christine, who had taken the plunge, but Christine wasn't a PR person, but she kept my life together.
Okay.
And in every other way. She was the most incredible. She's still a very dear friend of mine. I love her to bits.
So it was you grinding throughout all of these different people?
Me, Christine, and a dog.
That was it. What's the dog called?
It was called, I don't know, Tusker, I think. Tusker, and also a tortoise that a friend of mine had on the first day, 1st of October, dropped off this huge tortoise because we were on an acre of land in Dennis Pritt. And she's like, this is your lucky mascot, so I'm going to leave this tortoise for you. Tortoise is still alive. He's called Margie. He's doing well.
Headed for 100.
Yeah. But so that was it. So I was doing a lot of it. But obviously, month 3, and you realize that actually, first of all, I started my own business. I would have more money. So I would spend more time with my children. And I was like, none of that was happening.
It was even worse.
I was just running ragged. Yeah, I was really, really, so I hired. And then, of course, you realize that when your name is in the brand, people want to see you.
Yeah.
So I'm like, they're like, okay, well, I'd say, we'll be there at whatever time.
There's no we, it's you.
And then I would send one of my team, they'd be like, obviously we're not that important because you didn't come. So I was spread very thin. I was spread very, very thin.
Okay, so so many questions, Gina. Too much from what you're sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did it look like? I mean, because now I can imagine handling a bank, you sort of understand this. But now you're doing a client who probably is in the alcohol sector or whatever it may be.
So we did Shell quite quickly afterwards, which, sort of oil, retail oil, which was not too bad. Then we got South African breweries. And if ever I was challenged, it was that, because here we were, coming to compete with Kenya breweries.
Yeah.
And South African companies have traditionally not had the greatest experiences of coming to do business in Kenya. So, yeah, that was a big one. I was between here and Johannesburg a lot, and they built the new factory, which President Moy opened, and we did all that. But it was a real challenge. They put up all these billboards. I can't even remember how much they spent now, like tons of money putting up all these billboards, and they were all defaced, overnight. And so it was very challenging.
I mean, that must have been hard because Kenya Breweries was a monopoly. You are literally trying
huge.
to.
Yeah, it was. I learned a lot of lessons.
Anything that you want to share undercover or whatever?
It was just like, when you're taking on such an established big brand, there's just a lot more groundwork that you need to do. And I was like quite bullish, like, yeah, we can do this, to do this. It was very, very, very stressful. Okay. But it was nice to work with a different company. It was a skill set that I didn't have.
Yep.
And I learned. Because don't forget, I'd always worked for the winning brand. For me, I'd never. So suddenly, we were this underdog brand that I was supporting. And so I learned a lot.
What about Shell?
Shell was easy. They were established. That was just run of the mill stuff.
Okay.
But again, a lot of stakeholder engagement, which I found was really where my niche was. A lot of government relations, a lot of being the go-between between clients and government, and I really found that I excelled at that.
But how then do you clone yourself? Because now you're getting employees and you need the employees to maintain the Gina Din brand.
So we needed to train. I think, for me, what it was just realizing that it didn't exist. That creating the quality of people that I wanted and that I wanted my brand to be known for would mean that I would have to train. And I learned that really quickly. And so we put in a program. And of course, I took the graduate program from Barclays, and I just adapted it to a PR program that we would get our staff to go through
as part of the induction.
And we became the training school, because as soon as we trained them, of course, the new PR companies that would come along would take them. But you know what? That was okay. I kind of felt that was my responsibility, because not only was I creating a brand, I was creating an industry. And so that, at first it was like, oh, damn, how can we train you and then you just, you leave. But, later on I was cool with it. I was like, okay, that is my responsibility. That is part of the price I have to pay for creating an industry that I'll always be known by. It's legacy. For me, it's legacy. And I think I've left a really strong legacy.
Yep. That one I completely agree. I love what you've said there. The same thing sort of happened to me with the digital sector, of people coming to offer you.
And it hurts, right?
It does. In fact, that's why I really love the fact that you've sort of painted a bigger context where look at it like you are building the foundation of the industry.
And now I look at them, there's a group, the Gina Din group, that meet of all our former employees. I'm never invited.
You're alumni.
The alumni, and they're so sweet, because they meet once a year and they send me lots of pictures, and it's just very lovely, that there's so many of them, and some of them are named Gina. They have little kids that are named after me. It's so beautiful. And this last year that they met, they called me and they're like, "Boss, you're turning 60 next year." And I'm like, "Yep." And they're like, "Well, we're hosting you." And I'm like, they're like my children. They are just the most wonderful. I've had really incredible people work with me.
Yep.
Really.
Yep. And who are in high places and doing some amazing things.
But they never forget where they came from. You talk to them, they'll remind me of things. I've got one of my employees who hardly spent any time in Nairobi, and was the first person from his part of the region to actually go into PR. And he reminds me of how when I wanted him to join, I took him for lunch and we went to Java, and he did not know how to use a knife and fork. So he waited for me so that he could copy me, and he waited for me to order so he could order exactly what I ordered. And, and I look at him now, and now he's this high flyer. And we laugh because, he looked like this big guy, looked like, one of Moy's security guys. So we would go to Mombasa for events, and people would think he was my security. But, I'm very blessed. I'm really blessed to have worked with incredible people.
Okay. Gina, again, thank you so much for the lessons. We've got to keep this story moving because there's too much you've done. Let's talk about the big one that happens, Safaricom.